Hello and welcome to another episode of Oh and That's a Bad Miss, the snooker podcast hoping to bring you all the latest news, all the best gossip, all the good stuff that you love about this great sport. And this week we have had the Welsh Open. What a great tournament to round off the Home Nations series. But before we get into that, I'd be amiss without mentioning reddit.com/r/snooker. We're approaching 10,000 subscribers to that. So head over there if you want discussion threads to every ranking event, every major event, and even this week's China Open qualifiers, allowing you to talk about anything snooker related, whether it's your own amateur game or the professional game. Anything goes within reason. So head over to reddit.com/r/snooker. So yeah, as I mentioned, we had the Welsh Open this week, and I was lucky enough to be in attendance for the final yesterday. I did mention last week that I'd be recording and a certain amount of the podcast while I was there. I did, but unfortunately I had to do it on my phone because I don't actually have a laptop. I've just got this big hulky desktop computer, and I can't imagine taking that in the back of my Toyota Aygo all the way to Cardiff. So I used my phone and the file was corrupted. So unfortunately my mid-session thoughts about the tournament are going to have to be from memory instead of what I was saying. So I sat in a car park in Cardiff talking to my phone for what turned out to be no reason whatsoever. So fantastic. Yesterday was a very long day for me. I'll just get straight into the final. Not gonna spoil it. Well, I imagine most of you are already seeing the results, but I'm not going to talk about the actual final. I'll just talk about the final day and everything that surrounded it first. So yesterday was fantastic. I drove from Dorset to Cardiff to watch the final, which was obviously Neil Robertson versus Stuart Bingham. And fantastic. If you guys have never been to see live snooker before, I highly recommend it, especially if it's one of the larger tournaments. I know the Welsh Open, they like to push a bit, but with this, obviously, you if you've been watching snooker on the TV for a long time, you get to see stuff that you never would have noticed before. For example, you get to have the little bit with the MC who comes out and does a little warm up the crowd a little bit beforehand. You also get to see everyone involved with the show who doesn't make it onto the camera. Everyone, the cogs in the machine that allow World Snooker to work, all the people selling the merchandise, all the people doing X, Y and Z. And my God, okay, World Snooker, please for the love of God get someone different on your designs. The t-shirts they have are horrific. I'm sorry, but I'm no graphic designer, and that's why I don't want to. The closest I've got to that is designing the logo for the podcast, and that's okay, but it doesn't look fantastic, and that's still 20 times better than any of the t-shirts World Snooker have got. They don't look professional and they don't sell well, and you can tell, which is a shame because World Snooker's merchandise, if you go to a show, it's actually really impressive. They've got tip, for your cue, they've got like tip replacement kits, they've got all these things that are quite specialist, but it's perfect to have there. It makes perfect sense to be selling it at World Snooker, but I don't know, for a lot of sports you don't really see that, do you? You don't see footballs being sold at football, and you don't see shin pads being sold at football, but at the snooker it makes perfect sense. So for example, I picked up a copy of this month's Snooker Scene magazine, which I haven't read before. I've only ever listened to the podcast. But the magazine I know has been going for 40, 50 years, something like that, something unbelievable. And I'm looking forward to diving into that. I haven't had really much time to yet. I'll explain why. The official programs are also good as well, but the t-shirts are horrific. But that's the sort of stuff that I never would have known they had if it wasn't for going to an event and the people who work behind the scenes and being able to see. I mentioned it in the discussion thread on Reddit, but during the final session of the final, you could look from where I was sat, you could see into the Eurosport commentary box. So I could see Neil Folds. I couldn't see Dave Hendon because the monitor was blocking him. But what I could see was every time Neil Folds removed the mic from his mouth, food went into it. He was eating his tea while he was commentating, so that was fantastic. I was laughing my arse off, just looking over and seeing Neil Foulds talk, and I can hear him in my ear because I had one of the earpieces on, which are fantastic. So I could hear him say something. I'd hear it go quiet. I'd look over, and you could see him put his mic down, pick up his fork, and have some spaghetti or something. It did make me laugh. Speaking of the earpieces, they're very good. They're a tenner, and you get a choice between listening to Eurosport or BBC Sports commentary teams. And for the first session, I chose BBC because Willie Thorne, obviously, and Joe Johnson was in Eurosport, so that's a pretty easy choice to make. But for the second session, I went with Eurosport because it was Dave Hendon and Neil Foulds, and I think those two are pretty bloody good. They're a fantastic little bit of kit. They're just a radio, an FM receiver, not a transmitter, because they don't transmit, do they? But they're really good, and you could reuse them for the whole season, I believe. I don't think they carry over into the next season, but they do. They are reusable this season, I think. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got in terms of aspects that you learn from the snooker. Other than it really puts into perspective how gentlemanly it is, how honest the sport is, and how much skill it takes, because you don't really know until you're there. You see the way the cue ball reacts in person instead of on the telly. It's different, and it's fascinating. So yesterday I left home at around 9 o'clock, drove to Cardiff, and I live in Dorset, so that's just over 2 hours on sort of light traffic. It was quite a nice drive up, actually, over the Severn Bridge, which has no tolls on it, quite nicely. And got there, settled in, went over to the snooker, watched the first session. Neil Robertson was looking fantastic. He was only looking fantastic because Stuart Bingham was looking so abysmal. My God, was he bad? He was horrific. I haven't seen, in the second frame he missed a black off the spot, and I didn't see him miss it because I wasn't watching the pot. I was simply watching the cue ball, and I heard everyone go, "Oh!" and I thought something had happened in the arena. And then I look, and the black's still in the jaws. I couldn't believe it. It's a black off the spot that he's going to make 999 times out of 1,000, and he missed it. And that pretty much summed him up in the first session. Neil Robertson went into the overnight session leading 5-3, and Bingham was really lucky to be only 5-3 behind. As I said in the recording that was lost, I thought that if Bingham could cut out the mistakes, Robertson would struggle, because Robertson has sort of struggled to beat him while Bingham was playing the worst he ever has. So I thought if Bingham could cut out the mistakes, he would return and beat Robertson. But I didn't think Bingham could do it. So my final prediction was that Neil Robertson would win, and I thought he'd win easily. I think I said it would be 10-6, 10-5, something along those lines. 9-6, 9-5, sorry. Or something along those lines. So after the first session, went had something to eat, recorded the podcast, which obviously made me look like a bit of a knob, sat in a car park on my own, talking to my phone about snooker, and all the footage of which I cannot even use. Brilliant. Went back for the evening session at 7 o'clock, knowing I had a 2-hour drive ahead of me, and I saw Neil Robertson fire into the lead. Absolutely fulfill my expectations. Bingham missed some easy shots, Robertson cleared up. Before you knew it, he was 7-3 ahead. That's a huge deficit to overcome for Bingham. You would have thought this is easy peasy. I thought this isn't going to make it to the mid-session interval. I'll be gone by 9 o'clock, home by 11. Lovely. Work at 5:30 this morning. Fantastic. That's a decent amount of sleep. That's more than enough sleep for me. Brilliant. And then Bingham came back, and Bingham kept winning and winning and winning, and we had a 46-minute frame, and we had a 35-minute frame, and he kept winning, and it was 7-all. And I was like, Jesus Christ, it's 10 past 10, and I've got work in the morning. Someone win. And then Robertson took the last 2 frames to win 9-7. And it was fantastic. It was a very good match. I couldn't have asked for anything more. Although I joke about how I wanted it to be over earlier so I could go home. It was everything you could have asked for a first ranking event final to see live. It was a thrilling match. Not the highest quality in places, but it was a very interesting match. When it got 7-7, I had no idea which way it was going to go. And obviously Neil Robertson won his second ranking event of the season, his first of 2019, which makes it, I believe, 14 years since Neil Robertson has not won at least one ranking event, which is incredible, really. He's had some huge successes, 2010 world champion, and to be that consistent for so long, and not even to mention the 100th century season. He's a hell of a player, and I'm glad to see him back winning, and he won the Scottish Open last season, so he obviously quite enjoys the home nation events. So I'm very happy to see him back winning where he should be. He should be winning. A player of his standard should be winning tournaments repeatedly. So after the match ended and the trophy had been given out, I believe it was around 11 o'clock, 10 past 11, and I still had to get out the car park, get out of Cardiff, get back to Dorset, and then go to bed. So I didn't get home until 10 past 1, quarter past 1, and then fell asleep probably half an hour after that, so I got less than 4 hours sleep. So if I'm ranty a little bit or sort of phase in and out of concentration, you know why. I've just finished a full shift. I should probably be in bed, but I thought you guys need a podcast. So I'm going to sit here, I'm going to do a bit of research beforehand, and then I'm going to record the podcast, and then I'm going to get into bed. Although I've got no food in the house, so I've got to go shopping. My God, I never make it easy on myself, do I? So yeah, that was a long day, but the things you do to watch snooker are silly sometimes. In one of the frames, Neil Foulds mentioned when Terry Griffiths won the World Championship, and I believe it was against Cliff Thorburn, and the final went until 10-4 in the morning, and that how commuters, instead of the crowd, there weren't too many left, but the ones who stayed, instead of waiting for the last train home, they waited for the first train in the morning home. That's how late it got, and I was sat there thinking, please don't let that happen. I've got work tomorrow. I don't want to have to do an all-nighter just to watch some snooker. I mean, I love it, but I'm postman. I work a very physical job. I do 3 times as many steps as the average person is supposed to aim for as a goal. I'm a very physical job, so I need my sleep. Anyway, mental breakdown over. The Welsh Open, going back to the beginning of the Welsh Open, started well for Robertson. It started as well as it ended. He smacked in his 4th maximum break of his career. Fantastic. I mean, it had been a little while. We'd been wondering for a long time who would have the 147th 147, and it was Dave Gilbert in the Champions League, which was a bit of a disappointment. If this had been it, you would have been pretty chuffed. Neil Robertson, it makes sense, the Century King, the ex-World Champion, Welsh Open, decent coverage, BBC Sport, Eurosport, Quest, huge. Would have been fantastic. Dave, you bastard, why did you make that 147 at the Champions League? And funnily enough, you never would have thought it'd happen. Nopon Sankam made a 147, which is his second of his career, I think. Or am I wrong? Doesn't say on here. I think it might be it might be his first. But that was a second in 1 week, which came against Mark Selby. It's fantastic. It shows the quality of snooker has improved so much in recent years. And yeah, 2 147s in one tournament. It's like when Liang Wenbo nearly had 2 147. Was it Liang Wenbo? Yeah, Liang Wenbo nearly had 2 147s last season, back to back. But he broke down, I think, on the last black. I think he got a 147 and a 140, which, could you imagine if he... 2 147s back to back, that's like having 2 9 darters back to back in darts, which has also never happened. We had some shockers. as part of the Welsh Open, we had Judd Trump and Mark Williams both being knocked out in the second round. Two players who have both been playing pretty well. Mark Williams has had more of an iffy season than Judd Trump, but Judd Trump's been the man to beat. He's been playing incredible. He's probably been the player of the season so far. He won the Northern Ireland Open, obviously, not too long ago, and the Masters and the World Grand Prix. He's been great. But Dwayne Jones, ranked number 72, which is 68 places behind Judd Trump, beat him 4-2. Snooker, you can never guess, can you? You can never, ever know, and that's why you gotta love this sport, because people look at it and say, "Oh, Ronnie O'Sullivan's dominating. He's always winning. He'll never stop winning." No, he's not dominating, because he got knocked out too by Alexander Ursenbacher. Wasn't in the second round, to be fair. It was in the third round, not much further, but he knocked out O'Sullivan 4-2 as well. Now, you look at O'Sullivan's performance during this tournament, and it really pissed me off. He was taking stupid shots on. He was making a mockery of his opponents. And he refused to make century breaks. He was fouling on purpose to not make century breaks. It was really aggravating for me personally, because it's a sport. If you're going to compete, compete. If you don't want to compete and you want to fuck around, go somewhere else. It's that simple. It's a sport. You should be trying as hard as you can to win, and if you're not, then you don't compete. And a lot of people say, "Oh, it's Ronnie, cheeky Ronnie." No, you know me, I don't buy into that shit. Sorry for the language, but I don't buy into it. I'm not. It's supposed to be a sport. You're supposed to show your opponents respect and not take stupid shots and mess around. It infuriated me personally. I couldn't watch many of his matches. I did end up watching the Alexander Ursenbacher match, and funnily enough, Ursenbacher ranked one above Dwayne Jones, world number 71, and he hasn't even been beyond the last 64 of a ranking event until this week. And he was into the last 16, where he was knocked out by Zhao Jingtong on the Thursday. Yeah, O'Sullivan getting close to that 1,000 centuries. I have a feeling he's aiming for the World Championships to do it. It's a bit of a spectacle, because he's skipping the China Open coming up. And obviously the World Championships, Sheffield, huge place to do it, and would be spectacular. I'm planning on buying some tickets for maybe some of the earlier rounds and heading up there at some point. Maybe if I can find some of the later rounds. Obviously the tickets are very difficult to come by, and yeah, I'd love to head over there now. I've got a bit of a bug for watching live snooker, and I've always wanted to go to the Crucible. It'd be spectacular. I also mentioned that Mark Williams had been knocked out early on, and that was in the second round, and that was to Zhang Anda, who 4-2 again. And incredible, because Williams is world number 2 and has been playing relatively well. I mean, he's not had his World Championship success this season, but the Worlds haven't happened yet. But to be knocked out by Zhang Anda is crazy. I mean, Zhang's top break was only 71, so I think it shows that Mark wasn't playing at his best in any way. But, you know, that's snooker for you. It's very unpredictable. And speaking of unpredictable, the quarterfinals were all over the place. You had John Higgins versus Joe O'Connor, which, unless you're a pretty hardcore fan of snooker, you're never going to have heard of Joe O'Connor before. And guess what? You're only going to want it. John Higgins, obviously not having a great season, but you thought he's got to the quarterfinals. If he can retain his Welsh Open title, fantastic for him. That might be the springboard to rising back up and stop him from dropping out the top 16 of the 1 year list. But he lost 5-3 to Joe O'Connor in the first quarterfinal. Stuart Bingham overcame Zhao Jingtong 5-2, as we know. Bingham eventually making on to the final. Hussein Vafai defeated Scott Donaldson 5-1. Hussein Vafai versus Scott Donaldson in a major ranking event quarterfinal, with the names like Mark Selby, Ding Junhui, Mark Williams, Ronnie O'Sullivan, all of these players all playing in the same tournament, and Hussein Vafai defeated Scott Donaldson in the quarterfinal. I wonder what kind of odds you could have got on that at the beginning of the tournament. And then Neil Robertson almost got knocked out in the quarterfinals, surviving a deciding frame scare from Kurt Mafflin. Now, I went into the semi-finals hoping at least one of the underdog players would make it, because I thought that would probably make a more exciting atmosphere when I went to the final, and who doesn't love a good underdog story? But unfortunately, Joe Connor was defeated 6-2 by Stuart, but Stuart Bingham played incredibly well after the first two frames. Neither of them could pot anything, but Stuart Bingham knocked in 4 centuries, I think, after that. It was fantastic. And Neil Robertson absolutely demolished Hussein Vafai 6-0. Bit embarrassing for Vafai, but you've got to look at yourself, O'Connor and Vafai, and think, my God, I've made it to the semi-final of the Welsh Open on BBC Wales, on Eurosport, on Quest, one of the bigger tournaments, one of the home nations, semi-finals. I'll tell you what, they'll appreciate that little bit of cash they get as well, because we know that the struggle a lot of these players have at the lower ranks with money, as we've seen with Chow Yu Peng, who was relatively high ranked, and Yu Delu being done for match fixing, and David John and Jamie Jones. And who knows who's to come. There's more. You've got to know there's more out there, because they're struggling with money. And I believe it's the UK Championships, or is it Masters? One of them has just been upped from £200,000 prize money this season to $250,000 next season. Now, to the top players, that £50,000 isn't... I mean, it's a huge amount of money for them, but it's not as big a deal. If you take that £50,000 and split that amongst the lower ranked players when they make it to the earlier rounds of the UKs, do it. That's huge to them. That can keep them on the tour, because some of these players have to drop off the tour because they can't play. They can't afford to get to the tournaments. They're looking for sponsors, but they can't, because snooker struggles for sponsors at the highest end of the game, let alone the lowest. The only reason the high end of the game gets it is because of Barry Hearn's company, who run PDC as well, and what is it, Matchroom Sports, that's what it's called. Yeah, it's a difficult one. But Joe O'Connor and Hussein Vafai got every reason in the world to be proud of themselves after this week, and hopefully we'll see him again in the later rank events. Hussein Vafai, I believe, is only 24 or 26, so he's a young lad. He's got a lot of learning to do in the game, and I always feel weird talking about this as experiencing. I'm 21, so I can't imagine calling him a young lad, but he's got a lot to learn about the game still, just from the older players and stuff you pick up along the way. Yeah, so I think that pretty much rounds up the Welsh Open. Today, at the moment, let's have a look. We have sorry for the mouse clicking, it's right next to the mic. We have the first day of the China Open qualifiers in the Chase Leisure Centre. I always find it funny that snooker is still played in leisure centres. We've got some fun little matches, and it's interesting because there could be some surprises. For example, Jamie Clark is 2-1 up on Noppon Senkam at the moment, and Alexander Ersenbecker versus Matthew Stevens. That's a big match because Stevens having a bit of a comeback this season from where he was, and Alexander Ersenbecker obviously knocking out Ronnie O'Sullivan in the last tournament. Could go either way, that one. Sonny Akani's playing Sam Craigie. That's a good match. Dominic Dale wiped the floor with Reece Clark 6-0. My goodness. Dominic Dale obviously dipping his feet into a lot more punditry recently. He was at the Welsh Open final for BBC Wales. Yeah, so after the 3 days of the China Open, we have got the 4 days of the snooker shootout, which obviously last season was won by Michael Giorgio. And we shall see. I'll let you know my opinions on that next week, because it's been dropped by ITV, and I think that, to be dropped by ITV4, says a lot. And then a couple of days after that, I told you, February is ridiculous for snooker. 2 days after that, we've got the Indian Open, which obviously was rescheduled because of the devastating flooding in the area that happened when the Indian Open was supposed to be happening originally, which is, I think, the second ranking event normally after the Riga Masters. And then after that, we've got the Coral Players Championships, and that's getting into early March. And there's only one thing on people's mind by the time you get to April, isn't there? China Open, qualifiers, And then the big one, the world title. We are fast approaching it, but there's a lot of snooker to be played yet. And I'll be with you all the way through. And you know who else will be with you? You know I'm going to mention them again. It's reddit.com/r/snooker. Hop on discussion threads. We went through it all at the beginning. If you've forgotten all that, it's only been 25 minutes. Go see a doctor. You shouldn't be forgetting this information so quickly. Just hop over to reddit.com/r/snooker. Start up an account, or if you've already got a Reddit account, join in the conversation. I've been Charlie. I will see you next week with a summary of the China Open qualifiers and the snooker shootout.